First up, I have to start by saying what a beautiful scene this is from up here. We can see your beaming smiles right through the masks. And for those of you on our Zoom video conference, we know you're here at heart, and we can't wait to see you in person soon. You know, it's that happiness that forms part of what we want as parents, especially for our kids to enjoy forever. And that's why we're here. But we know that's not a guarantee. Our children will grow up. They will make their own decision. They have free will. And then the path of child raising is no easy task. Just to put it simply, we have two major forces working against us. We have that external force of the world that increases day by day because Satan's on a mission to corrupt the entire human race. And then we have the inside out force, right? That internal inclination towards bad from the youth up. So it can seem almost impossible at times, but yet we see many families that have had great results. Many children, they all continue loving Jehovah as adults, and East Beacon is a wonderful example of that. We may not have a lot of kids, but we know that every young person and adult here was raised to love Jehovah. And so our little ones are next. But of course, sadly, it doesn't always work out that way. So the question is, what determines that, right? We want to know. Well, disclosure, as we said at the beginning, they will choose. Whatever we do, they will still choose when they're adults. But today, we're going to focus on what we do have in our control as parents. A lot of this depends on what we're doing to build with the right materials, to build the faith or spirituality of our kids. Now, what do we mean by the right materials? Well, it's actually a construction analogy that's found in the scriptures. Let's take a look. 1 Corinthians chapter 3. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, and we're going to start on verse 10. And just as a little bit of context, this letter was written to the brothers in Corinth, and Jehovah inspired Paul to write it. He had a major role in aiding that congregation into the truth. And note the analogy, what he compares it to, starting in verse 10. According to the undeserved kindness of God that was given to me, I laid a foundation as a skilled master builder, but someone else is building on it. But let each one keep watching how he is building on it. So there's a foundation. He considers himself a builder. And then we keep building upon that foundation. What is the foundation? Note verse 11. For no one can lay any other foundation than what is laid, which is Jesus Christ. And isn't it true, as Christians, our beliefs, our actions are based on Jesus Christ. It's the foundation. But then we keep building upon it, and note verse 12 and 13. Now, if anyone builds on the foundation gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, or straw, each one's work will be shown for what it is, for the day will show it up, because it will be revealed by means of fire. And the fire itself will prove what sort of work each one has built. So we see this list of building materials. But if we look at it closely, there's really only two categories. You have your gold, your silver, and precious stones, which are fire-resistant materials. And then you have your wood, hay, or straw, which are combustible. They catch fire easily. Which one of these do we want to use when building the faith of our kids? Well, to help us, let's take a look at the following image. It has two structures. Which one of these best represents what you would want your kids to become? I think it's safe to say we want to go for the gold, right? We want a fortress of faith. So how do we do that? How can we build towards the gold? What are those golden-like materials in a spiritual sense? Well, when we look at the scriptures, many times these materials, gold, silver, precious stones, are used figuratively to represent godly qualities like wisdom, discernment, loyalty. As a matter of fact, let's take a look at an example. If we go to Proverbs chapter 2. Proverbs 2, and starting in verse 1, and we actually have these verses in our today's Watchtower study. And note the comparison. Proverbs 2:1 says, "My son, if you accept my sayings and treasure up my commandments, by making your ear attentive to wisdom and inclining your heart to discernment, moreover, if you call out for understanding and raise your voice for discernment," and note here, "if you keep seeking for it as for silver." So you see, there's the comparison. And isn't it true that these qualities make up the Christian personality structure? All of us want to have these, and we want our kids to have them. So why is it important that we have fire-resistant qualities like these? Well, we read in Corinthians that it would be put to test by fire. What is that fire? At first glance, we may think of persecution, and that definitely is a test of faith. And our brothers in Russia, Ukraine, like Brother Gallegos mentioned, are facing that. But the scripture said each one's work will be put or subjected to fire. So it means no one's left out, and not all of us face persecution. So really the fire represents anything, any temptation or pressure that can ultimately destroy our spirituality or faith, or that of our children. It can come by way of sexual immorality, temptation towards drugs and alcohol, towards degrading entertainment, materialism. And you know, all of these are found in school. So as parents, we have to consider, is my child already having to face that fire? And how is he faring? How is she doing? Will she be able to withstand because she's built with fire-resistant materials? Will he catch fire easily? So you see, it depends on if we're using the right materials. And we know what they are now, but now the question is, well, how do we build with those materials? If you're in construction, you would probably agree that even if you have quality materials, if you don't know how to use them, you can waste the material, right? So does the Bible include building methods or techniques for parents to follow in building these into their children? Yes, it does. And we're going to be discussing 4 building methods based on the Bible. Now, to help us with memory aid, take a look at the following acronym. Gold. And how appropriate. We want to go for the gold. And so what do each one of these represent? Well, we're going to analyze each one. What is the G for gold? Well, before we give you the answer, we want to do a little experiment, and we're asking for your participation if you'd like. If you can raise your hand in the air, physical this time, not electronic, including those on Zoom. Very good. And follow my instructions. Take your finger and touch your forehead. Now touch your nose, and then touch your chin. Your chin, yes. What happened there? Well, it's just a simple way to illustrate that as humans, we learn better by what we see than what we hear. Now, children are not any different. Well, they're humans too, so children are not different. They learn better from what they see. So the first building method is giving a good example. If we want our children to have those qualities, what do they need to see in us? Those qualities. And what is the Bible principle? Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 6. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 7. Now, these words were directed to the nation of Israel. Principles still exist, but you can be sure the parents may have paid extra attention to verse 7. But 4 through 7 says, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 7. Listen, O Israel, Jehovah our God is one Jehovah. You must love Jehovah your God with all your heart and all your soul in all your strength. These words that I'm commanding you today must be on your heart, and you must inculcate them in your sons and speak of them when you sit in your house, when you walk on the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. We emphasize you or your because it was the parents' responsibility, right? To first love Jehovah before sharing that with their children. So, what do our children see when they see us? Do they see a palace of faith, a fortress? Or is it a little closer to the other simple structure? Do they see a deep relationship with Jehovah when they see us pray to him? Do they see that obeying Jehovah is the best life there is because they see it in us? Do they see in our decisions about work, about entertainment, about how we use our time, that Jehovah is first in our lives? That's what a good example does. So that leads us into our second method. And we actually touched on it in verse 7. Let's reread Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 7. See if you find the O for gold there. And you must inculcate them in, or the note says impress upon, repeat, in your sons and speak of them when you sit in your house and when you walk on the road and when you lie down and when you get up. There's no O, Brother Mia. Well, the essence of this basically stands for open communication. Listening, talking. Yes, we want to have open communication with our children in order to inculcate love for Jehovah. Now this, again, we live busy lives, especially in these last days. It may seem impossible. The Watchtower addresses that, how we use our time. But Jehovah makes it simple for us. He not only gives us the command, but he always gives us examples. He tells us how we can do it in a practical sense. Just look at verse 7. Is there any action on there that we don't do pretty much every day? Do you get up? Do you lie down? Do you sit? Do you walk? So what is Jehovah saying? Well, if we look at this in practical terms, let's look at each one. He says, when you sit at your house, have open communication, inculcate. Well, you've probably heard that it's good and very beneficial to sit down as a family, at least for one meal a day. Have you experienced that? It's not just eating. There's a whole lot that happens in that meal. And to help us visualize that, years ago in Awake magazine, quoted from a home economics teacher and mother, and it really paints the scene. Try to visualize this. It almost sounds poetic. She said, surrounded by the people who matter, gazing into the faces we love, we count our blessings and share our burdens, reliving the daily dramas of missed buses and skinned knees. The table is where we mark milestones, divulge dreams, bury hatchets, make deals, give thanks, plan vacations, and tell jokes. It's also where children learn the lessons that families teach: manners, cooperation, communication, self-control, values, following directions, sitting still, taking turns. It's where we make up and make merry or be happy. It's where we live between bites. It's a beautiful picture, right? And that's all in one meal, one sit down. So Jehovah's never wrong. And we can do that. It's at our reach. What about walking on the road or traveling? Well, for 2 years, we haven't traveled to the meetings, but here we are now, right? So growing up, I recall in my childhood, we lived about 30 minutes away from the Kingdom Hall. So that meant back then, 3 times a week, we spent about 3 hours in the car as a family just for meetings. And some of the best conversations I remember with Dad are on those car rides, and lessons that I never forgot. And on top of that is where we memorize kingdom songs and Bible dramas on audio cassette. If you don't know what that is, ask anybody above 25, I think. But the point is, we all can do that, right? We can talk while we're on the road. And I see that now. Those are precious moments with my daughter. Now, when you lie down, we all lie down at some point. And you may think, well, this one I got. I always put my kids to bed, we do a prayer, and turn on the nightlight, we're all set. But if we're being honest with ourselves, isn't it true that after an exhausting day of work, running around, errands, doing laundry, whatever it may be, it can be tempting to say a quick thank you for everything, amen prayer, or let the kids do it. They need to learn how to do their prayers anyways. And there's nothing wrong with that. They need to learn that. But remember that first method, giving a good example? This is a golden opportunity for them to see our open communication with our Father Jehovah. And what are the last thoughts we want them to have when they go to bed? Again, Jehovah knows what he's talking about. And finally, when you get up, if we're not morning people, this is a struggle. And then you have the rat race, right? Getting kids ready to school, getting ready for work. And it's hard. But we've all heard that it's good for kids to have a good meal before going to school, for example. A breakfast is the most important meal of the day, they say. Well, spiritually speaking, our spiritual morning routine is just as important, if not more. When we think about the fire that our child will be put through that day, it impresses upon our mind the importance of having them listen to Jehovah's thoughts at the beginning of the day. So here we've just skimmed the surface on that one verse that Jehovah tells us, inculcate this in your children. Have open communication. So that leads us into our third building method. What do you think the L is? We're a go for gold, but we need the L. Well, let's look at Proverbs 8, verse 33. Verse 33 says, listen to discipline and become wise and never neglect it. Now, you may think it's listening, and that's definitely important. But that falls under open communication, right? So what is it? Well, it talks about discipline. And maybe growing up, we thought of discipline as something physical, something we feel. But it doesn't say feel the discipline, right? It says listen. When we look at the study research, what Jehovah is talking about with discipline is not just reproof or punishment. It involves teaching, training, instruction, and reproof. So it's a balance. When we do that, it becomes loving discipline. And that is our third building method. So how can we expound on this? Well, let's take a look at two principles that apply to discipline, and they complement each other. If we go to Proverbs 23, and we read verse 13. Proverbs 23:13 says, do not hold back discipline from a boy. If you strike him with the rod, he will not die. Now, this may not be our child's favorite scripture, but it gives us the authority as parents to reprove. Now look at Ephesians 6, verse 4. Ephesians 6:4, and fathers, do not be irritating your children, but go on bringing them up in the discipline and admonition of Jehovah. Much better for kids, right? What does the irritating part mean? Does that mean we can't discipline? Is it contradicting Proverbs? Well, no, because later it says bring them up in discipline. But again, the study guide it points to, if you take a look at it, if you're on the app, it's when we irritate them by causing it by hasty, rough, moody treatment. So out of anger, and moody means we're wishy-washy. Sometimes it's this, sometimes it's that. That's an irritation. It's not really discipline. So how do we apply these two principles? Well, let's present two scenarios. They're not real life examples, but they just help us understand this. Scenario number one, let's say you were raised by a harsh and critical father, and now you're determined to be the opposite with your children. At every opportunity, you praise your two boys or your little girl, even when they've done nothing really praiseworthy. It's important to make them feel good about themselves, you tell yourself. If they feel special, they'll have the confidence they need to succeed in life. Sounds pretty good. Or is it? Is that really based on these principles? What would be a more balanced approach? Well, when we think about what lesson we're teaching our child when we give them empty praise, how will they fare when they become adults and that praise doesn't exist? A more balanced approach based on what we've read is, well, we don't want to be overly critical of our children, but we at the same time want to base our praise on actual effort so they can make the connection. And one second scenario, say you have a workmate who is mad and impatient all the time. Now, this doesn't apply to Bethelites, but maybe outside. And nothing about you pleases him. Everything you do, he finds fault, rejects your work, rejects you as a person. How does that make you feel? I think some of us have been there. Even you kind of cringe at the thought. You might even want to quit your job. Well, the same can happen to a child when his parents are constantly badgering him or correcting him in anger. So there's that irritation. It's true, we have the authority to correct our children, right? But irritating them in fits of anger or moody treatment will actually cause damage, emotional, physical, and spiritual. So it's not always easy, admits Peter, a father from New Zealand. But know what he says next. But children need to learn that the discipline is the consequence of their action and not the result of a parent's lack of restraint. That's powerful. I'm going to repeat it. Children need to learn that the discipline is the consequence of their action and not the result of a parent's lack of restraint. So when we put together our building methods, it makes you think we're giving them an example, good or bad, when we discipline them. So a good example is following these principles. We want them to see that it's not okay to let out fits of anger, right? But they need to learn that their actions have consequences. So when you have that open communication, you're instructing them, well, now the discipline becomes loving. Just to give you an example, if we look at the next image, we may have seen this before. Okay, so what do you see there? Obviously somebody's in trouble. And they may be at grandma's house, he might have been rude, something happened. His brother wants in on the action, wants to know what kind of punishment he's getting. But that kind of brings out that they're not in the same room. The father took him out of the room. Mother's trying to cooperate too with the other brother. Is the father throwing a fit of anger? He looks disappointed, and that's worse sometimes than anger, right? And the kid is feeling it. And he didn't need to reprove him physically, but he's instructing him. So you see how loving that discipline is? So now you've got, thank you, brothers, you've got these three methods, and that points us into our fourth and final method, the D for gold. What do you think the D is? Well, we said at the beginning, it's so good to be together with our congregation. And we look to you, brothers, as role models for our kids. And East Beacon is full of them. But that said, at the end of the day, who's responsible for the spirituality of my child? I am, as the parent. So the D is actually an attitude. We need to have determination. We have to be determined to accept our role as parents and accept the responsibility. You might recall Manoah. Manoah, we studied him not too long ago in one of our meetings. Father of Samson, who became a judge in Israel, known for his strength. When he found out he was going to have a baby, and let alone with a special assignment, what's the first thing he did? He prayed to Jehovah, begged for that angel to come back and give him instruction on how to teach the child. Are we just as determined, accept our responsibility to teach our children those good manners, love for Jehovah, those fire-resistant qualities that we've discussed? Every effort we make will not go unnoticed. Even from our son or daughter, it may not seem like it in the moment, but wait till they grow up. So we've put together our gold, if we can bring that acronym up again. And did you see what the gold was. We want to give a good example. We want to have open communication, apply loving discipline, and be determined to be parents. Is it really worth all that effort? If we can bring up the palace and hut image again, please. Thank you. When you look at that, is it worth the effort? What do you want for your children? I think we all know the answer to that. Building fire-resistant qualities in our children truly brings reward. The Apostle Paul had the reward of seeing those he aided into the truth face severe opposition. They faced the fire, and it was a testimony that he had built well. Well, similarly, our heart's desire is to help those we teach, specifically our children, to develop these fire-resistant, durable Christian qualities, stand firm against any temptation or pressure, face the fire. And that will be our reward. We will see them come to love Jehovah, one way or the other. And at the end, when our children stand firm in the truth, they will not only make us happy, but they will honor the greatest Father of them all, Jehovah God.